I want to welcome all of our attendees. I'm really glad you all took the time today to attend this, I think, very timely training session. I think for those of you who don't know me, my name is Vanessa Baca. I am the manager for the City of Albuquerque Office of Neighborhood Coordination. I'm very glad you all could come. We are very fortunate to have today doing the training for us, Dr. Rudy Garcia. Dr. Garcia is he's a terrific guy, and he didn't pay me to say that either, but he's done some trainings with us previously. He does a lot of work with his neighborhood association, which is Huning Castle. He's very involved in the neighborhood safety patrol of his neighborhood. He can probably give you a better overview of his background than I can. I just want to give a little bit of a background for our attendees. This training session is going to be a little bit different than the ones that we usually have. Usually we have more than one person. We have some neighborhood folks. This time I wanted to give the focus to Dr. Garcia. He's going to be talking about ways to deal with neighborhood conflict, which is, I know, a very timely topic for many of us. I know a lot of us have been dealing with that as well. So what I will do is, once we go over a few ground rules and Dr. Garcia gives us a little bit of background, I will turn my camera off and Dr. Garcia will do his presentation. Attendees, if you have questions and you want to be part of the panel question and answer session once Dr. Garcia's presentation is over, please go ahead and type your question into the chat and indicate whether or not you want to be allowed into the webinar, and we can let you in, or we can just answer your question via chat at the end. So just a little reminder, let's please all be respectful of each other's opinions. You know, we're all different people. We may not always agree, but that's part of why we're doing this training today. And just like I said, be respectful of other people's opinions and ideas and questions. Dr. Garcia, if you want to go ahead and take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, Vanessa. I am going to pop up the share screen, and hopefully everybody can see that. Did that pop up correctly?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you everybody for attending today. I really appreciate it. The big thanks once again to Vanessa and Office of Neighborhood Coordination for hosting this workshop, Managing Conflict. Hopefully within the next hour or hour and a half, I can provide you with some tools for you to put into your conflict toolbox and understanding what conflict is and how to deal with it. I love this quote. I want to start out with this quote by Thomas Crumb. He's an author on managing stress and conflict resolution. And you're going to see that the theme of our presentation kind of goes this way. The quality of our lives depends on not on whether or not we have conflicts, but on how we respond to them. And so that's something you're going to hear me talk quite a bit about. Conflict is that conflict is hard, and I understand that. It can be difficult, but every one of us has the ability to work on conflict and deal with conflict to where there could be a positive resolution out of it. So you're going to hear throughout my presentation, I'm going to talk that we are within control of ourselves, and we have the ability to do a good job of addressing conflict. We have a good ability of hopefully coming out with good resolutions on conflict. So let me take you to the next slide, which is our workshop objectives. We are going to talk a little bit about what conflict is. We're going to look at the reasons and types of conflict, responses to conflict, and addressing it in a summary. So I think you'll see that the presentation moves fairly smoothly. I'm going to provide you real life examples that I've been involved in. And so you know a little bit of my background. I have been in a lot of positions where I have dealt with conflict. I have served on many boards locally as well as at the national level. My last job, I spent 27 years at Central New Mexico Community College. The last 11, I was Dean of Students. And as Dean of Students, I spent on a daily basis dealing with conflict because I was responsible for college safety and student discipline. I was a mediator. I was a facilitator between student faculty, student staff, student in the community, student and business. So on a daily basis, I dealt with that. You'll hear examples about that. I have served on neighborhood associations in the past as a board member. You heard Vanessa say I serve on one now. I've been in private industry. I've worked for government. I've worked for corporate America as well as small business. So I'm going to give examples that I think will be applicable, not just for neighborhood conflict, but conflict in general. Vanessa gave you the ground rules. And I just want to reiterate them. We want to make sure that all questions, if you can hold them to the end, it'll allow us to get through the presentation, and I'm more than happy to answer them. When it comes to some questions on conflict, I will say this. Sometimes I'll get asked a question about trying to solve something, and Everybody has a different situation when it comes to the conflict they're dealing with. I can provide some guidance and insight, and that's the best that I'll be able to do. But hopefully through this workshop, you'll be able to learn some new skills that will help you answer some of your own questions. Vanessa mentioned earlier that she is the host of the workshop. So one thing I will ask, if you can mute your mic. That way everybody has the opportunity to hear the speaker, whether that's myself or somebody else who may be asking a question. The screens have been closed, so that'll help from distraction. And last, enjoy the session. I hope you are able to have a good hour and a half of the session. So let's get you started. One of the things when I've done this workshop for people within the city or even at the national level, I will put this up on a flip chart and ask folks, when I write the word conflict or I say the word conflict, what comes to mind? Look at all these emotional responses: fear, anxiety, stress, anger, resentment, surprise, pleasant, unpleasant. I know conflict is hard. I know conflict can be difficult, but conflict can be resolved. And I'll say it again. It's a matter of looking within ourselves to see what we can do to address it. And it's really a matter of overcoming the fear and the anxiety that comes with conflict. And I'm going to be honest with you, nobody likes conflict. I can't think of anybody who likes conflict. When I became dean of students, people said, "Oh, good luck with conflict." And I said, "Yeah, I'll see how I do with it." But then I went into a position where I was dealing with it on such a daily basis. I became comfortable with addressing it to hopefully have good outcomes with it. And I think anybody and everybody can do that. So that's something you're going to hear me talk about, is that, yes, we have all these emotions. We can manage our emotions in such a way that we let logic move us forward to overcome any conflict situation we have towards a positive resolution. One of the biggest things that affects people in any type of confrontational situation is that we let our emotions overcome us. And I think many of you will agree that when you let emotions dictate your actions, that sometimes you don't have pleasant outcomes. And I know it's hard. Trust me, I know it's hard. It's not an easy thing. It is difficult, but when you back away and you learn how to control your emotions and you let logic dictate your actions, you can see that results can be beneficial. Now, I have this basic cycle of conflict chart just so you can see that when it comes to conflict, a lot of what happens in conflict is based on our beliefs and attitudes about conflict. As I mentioned, a lot of people I talk to, conflict is hard and they don't like to address conflict. If we don't like to address conflict, then sometimes nothing happens. But I wanted to show you this chart that just shows that when there is a conflict, our beliefs and attitudes are going to dictate our response, and then we have consequences from that. So when it comes to conflict, in its purest form, it's really changing a little bit our beliefs and attitudes in dealing with it. Like I said, I can't think of anybody I've ever spoken to who said they enjoyed conflict. And the sad part about conflict is that when you ask people, is conflict negative? They say yes. Actually, conflict can be very productive. It can be extremely productive if we address it well and we address it correctly. Now, let's talk in general about conflict. One thing I do recognize is that conflict is based on relationships. And I have this slide up here because I think it's important that, and I've just thrown some things out there. Conflict could be neighbor to neighbor, it could be neighborhood association or homeowner association board members to association members, or board member to board member, employee to employee, supervisor, employee, organization, person. I have this up here just to make the point that each relationship is going to be different when it comes to conflict. There are going to be some relationships where one person holds power and authority over the other person, or one party over the other person. Like in the world of work, where you have a supervisor, a manager, a director, and you have conflict with that person and you're reporting to them. So it does vary, or a board to board associations. And I bring it up because reacting to the conflict is still going to be very similar in all these situations, but it's also understanding those power dynamics in those relationships. Now look at the bottom bullets. Understanding conflict also means recognizing your biases and stereotypes. all of us, every human has biases and stereotypes. It can be hard to quell those a little bit so that when we're in a confrontational situation or we're involved in conflict, we're not passing judgment, allowing our biases to dictate our stereotypes with somebody. You're going to see the bullet point control emotions. You're going to see that in a lot of my slides. Every instance that I've been involved with conflict has always been emotional for some people. As dean of students, when I would have meetings with students regarding behavior, or I would facilitate between conflict situations between two parties, emotions were usually what popped up first. And I can't tell you the number of times I'd be sitting in a meeting where a person was yelling at me or screaming at me, and I allowed sometimes for that to happen so that I could work with the person to try and bring them to a level that would allow me to have a respectful and civil conversation so I could determine what was going on with the behavior. So controlling our emotions is hard in conflict. I understand that, get that, especially if somebody's yelling at you or treating you rudely. But you'll see that the benefits of controlling emotions are going to be so positive when you're able to do it. Effective communication and active listening, two skills that one of the things that I've learned in working with a variety of different entities throughout the city and nationally is that one of the top things that people will always tell me is whenever there's a conflict, I finally was heard. They heard me. I feel good because my voice was heard. And oftentimes I find that when that doesn't happen, then you get that anger and that angst going back and forth of I wasn't heard and nobody was listening to me. But active listening, it can be hard when you're in a situation where your defenses are getting up and your emotions are starting to creep up on you. But the ability to practice actively listening, where you're giving your full attention to somebody and you're not distracted, you're not allowing yourself to be distracted through cell phones or anything else, is so important. So these are some key things when we're talking about conflict. You've heard me say it already that managing conflict begins with understanding ourselves. I always like talking to folks and asking them, how often do you reflect when a situation has occurred? Do you ever step back and say, hey, could I have done this better? Could I have managed this better? Did I do anything wrong? And most of the time, the answer I get is not often. And I don't even know how many times I've gotten an answer where people say, I understand myself well. I used to have a mentor who would always tell me, Rudy, I know myself well enough that if somebody is pushing my button on something, I'm going to get angry. So I have to learn, and I had to teach myself to back away and come back another day or a later time to address it. That's one thing I always tell folks in any type of relationship when it comes to conflict. Understanding who you are, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, your biases and your stereotypes is going to be so important. Understanding how to treat that relationship and move towards conflict resolution. Once again, handling our emotions in conflict situations is important. I've been at board meetings. I've been at neighborhood association board meetings in the early 2000s. I was on a board on the west side, and there was a situation where some members started to yell at another board member, and then that board member got defensive and started yelling, and this was happening in front of a lot of people. And eventually it subsided, but I thought, if people had only controlled their emotions and maybe said, look, let's have a civil conversation outside the scope of this meeting. Let's move forward with the meeting and let's see if we can resolve this. It probably would have worked out for the better. I remember afterwards, I even was trying to talk to the board and saying, hey, look, maybe we need to come up with some ground rules here so that this doesn't happen again, because we didn't have ground rules at the time. And maybe we just need to figure out a better way to handle it. One thing I will say is that the pandemic it's interesting, there's a new term that was brought forth in the pandemic. It's a combination of pandemic and angry. It's called pangry. And many people become pangry on different things. But I have noticed during this pandemic that there has been more incivility, more rudeness, more anger. more conflict. It's people feel that things are out of control, out of their control, that they may not be able to control it. So there has been more confrontation, more situations where I think conflict has erupted between people, and less time for people to just sit down and have a dialogue. One of the things I used to do in all the places I worked at where I was either senior administration or management is whenever there was conflict, I always thought that people were more apt to sit down and have a civil conversation about conflict when we had food. So I used to have food a lot at our meetings sometimes, because I found that when people are eating and enjoying a meal together, that they're more likely to enjoy a dialogue and be civil. So that was something I used to do. If you look at the next bullet, our reactions to conflict can often be, you're probably familiar with when your body's under stress, it goes flight, fight, or freeze. I've added for this conflict dialogue the resolve. There is a fourth option here when it comes to conflict. Whenever our body goes under stress, which is usually when there's conflict, we reach a point of flight, fight, or freeze. Our physiology is sending everything throughout the body to go those three venues. It's harder to go the resolve method than it is to do the other three because we're not accustomed to that. But it's easier what I've seen with conflict, it's easier for people to go the flight path, which is retreat and ignore it, than it is to do the resolve. I haven't seen a lot of people that will fight it out, although there have been instances, and you'll hear me talk about it, verbal attacks. I have seen physical attacks, rarely, but I have seen it. In my case, as Dean of Students, I would see all three of those anytime somebody came in to talk to me involving conflict. And my job was to create resolution out of that situation. And I can't tell you the number of times where I would be in that office and my stress was high because I'm dealing with a situation where somebody is yelling at me or somebody's threatening, trying to ensure that we keep everybody safe and try to make sure that I can provide resolution. One thing as Dean of Students, I always try to do is rather than be punitive at any, now remember, as Dean of Students, I, in any relationship, had power and authority, but I never tried to abuse it in any way because I always wanted to make sure there was resolution to where whoever was involved in the conflict at least could walk away with some form of sense of respect, civility, and that something was resolved. Something I do want to bring up is that no matter what group you're in, no matter if it's you and another neighbor or HOA, homeowner association, neighborhood association, each one of us is going to can react to the same type of conflict in different ways. I always like to use the analogy is that if somebody gets in an accident and somebody's bleeding heavily, 5 people can come to the scene and provide aid, but each one of those 5 may react differently based on personalities, past experiences, or other cultures as you look at the next bullet. So something to keep in mind is that if you're dealing with conflict and you're working on a board, or you're working with other people, you're working on a team, each person is going to be a little bit different how they react with conflict. So it is important to understand that if you're a group trying to resolve conflict with another party, hopefully everybody in the group is on the same page. And that's the last bullet, is that different people might have a different comfort level with the same conflict. Not everybody's created the same, not everybody has the same background. My reaction to conflict is going to be different than maybe another board member who's never dealt with it as much as I have in my career or life. So just points to keep in mind. The presence of disagreement or conflict means there's a problem to be solved. One thing I have seen, and this isn't just with neighborhood associations or homeowners associations, it's also in the business world, whether that's a corporation or a small business or a family business. Sometimes the problem is ignored, thinking it's going to go away on its own, but it never does. If anything, it gets bigger and bigger. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It needs to be solved. It needs to be resolved. Sometimes you can have a neighbor to neighbor dispute and thinking that it's going to go away if nobody says anything, but it doesn't. I'm a big believer that, one, if we're respectful and we're polite, we can resolve issues through good dialogue and an effort to just get to know each other. One of the things I love about my neighborhood is that all of us, at least on my street, we are all very civil and respectful of each other because we've gotten to know each other. Irregardless of what your background is or what your thoughts are on a variety of things, we're all respectful. We all agree to disagree. If they're like my neighbor one day asked me, she got 2 new puppies, and she said, "Rudy, please, if my puppies are barking too much, please let me know." Because sometimes they're both her and her husband are not home. And I said, "Sure, no problem." And she's been so respectful of that. And vice versa. It's just a level of respect by getting to know one another and getting to talk to one another versus isolating ourselves and not having dialogue or conversation with our neighbors. I've often thought that conflict can be an opportunity for growth and change. You would not believe, and if I was to poll you, probably some of you, when you have resolved conflict, you probably have a sense of happiness, a sense of, wow, that was nice, that was resolved, what a nice thing. It is an opportunity for growth and change, no matter whether it's person to person or you're in an organization. But conflict is, I always say it, it's an opportunity for productive change and moving forward versus stagnation and not going anywhere. Here's the emotions thing again. So you want to pay attention to your emotions so it doesn't become an angry battle. I think as human beings, if somebody is yelling and screaming at us, we just get into that fight or flight. We'll, in some cases, freeze. We either want to fight back, yell and scream back, or run away. It is hard to hear somebody yell and scream at you, and you're trying to pay attention and you're trying to get them to recognize that, hey, look, I'm trying to have a conversation with you. I'm trying to be very respectful and civil so that I can hear what your concern or issue is. It is hard. I understand that. There were times where I would have 5 conflict meetings in a day where all 5 times I was yelled, screamed at, people flipped me off. And I would walk out, long meetings that could go 2-3 hours at times. But at the end of the day, if I gave the respect to the other person, I was able to move forward towards some type of resolution. Even after allowing somebody screaming out at me, I felt good about that. Let's put it this way. My goal was to always let the other person know that I'm not going to act like you are. I'm going to try and be respectful and civil and see if I can resolve this. And there were times that people would shake my hand after a situation like that and say, thank you for your respect. I'm sorry that I yelled and screamed at you. So it's a matter of really monitoring those emotions. If you look at that next bullet, I am going to say this, we do have a choice in how we respond to conflict. That's a given. It's our choice. Nobody controls us. Nobody makes us do things that we don't want to do. It is really on us to control how we respond to conflict. And I'm going to give you some types of conflicts and how we'll respond to them. And you're going to see that some of us do respond in different ways. But it is our choice, and that's important to know. And it's important to know that we control our emotions, we control ourselves, we control who we are, we control what we are. Nobody makes us feel guilty. We make ourselves feel guilty if we run into that. So the other thing to keep in mind when we look at this is that think of conflict as a productive way to solve something, but think of it as having many solutions, many possible solutions out of it. I've been in neighborhood meetings where there is a problem and it's being addressed by both the board and the association members. And there's a lot of knowledge and experience in that room, and everybody's respectful. And instead of one solution to a problem, we come up with 5 or 6 or 7. And everybody feels pretty good about that, to where you can prioritize your level of solutions. So I think the main limit is our creativity in designing a solution. And like I said, it's easier to retreat from conflict than it is to try and come up with a solution. But it is possible. It just takes patience and some time and a little bit of skill. When you look at communication and problem solving, it is going to enhance the ability to solve conflict. One of the top things I often hear when people say they're not being heard is also that the communication broke down. And once again, I think that happens because emotion. Parties have become emotional. Individuals have become emotional. They're no longer talking to each other. That disrupts the listening process. And I know it's hard to be an active listener if somebody is loud and abrupt and aggressive and rude. But once again, it's a matter of training ourselves to be prepared for a conflict that may result in that. One thing I'll bring up now too is in a lot of meetings I've been in, I have seen that when you have ground rules in a meeting and the ground rules are adhered to, you have such a nice meeting. People are civil, people are respectful. The times that people aren't, you can always revert back to the ground rules and in a quiet setting, address it with the person who was violating ground rules. But excuse me, I apologize. I've been dealing with some allergies, so my apologies if you hear me cough. And one of the handouts I gave you is ground rules. So we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. The best thing to do in a conflict situation is working together with the other person to face the problem cooperatively. I'm a big advocate of, if there's an issue between you and another person, be proactive and try to address it with the other person quickly and in a very civil and respectful way. It's something that I find is important. Best example I could give you is I was board president for Public Access Channel 27 in the mid-90s. And at that time on the board, we found out that one of the employees in that organization was embezzling money from the organization. And we found a board member was in cahoots with him. And things went south fairly quickly with us. Let's put it this way. We went from $350,000 in a budget to about $300. And I remember sitting down with other board members one-on-one to try and talk to them and say, we got to face this problem in a very unified way, working together. There was fear, which was understandable. At that point, the board did not have insurance, and so really the board could have been sued for it. But working together, we had, I think at that point, 9 board members, 5 quickly resigned. So I was left with 2 other board members to work with. Eventually, it just came down with those 2 left. And working in unison with the executive director of the organization I was running it, we ended up dealing with the conflict and coming out for the better for it. This is also very important that I think happens in conflict situations. We're not transparent. The more information I give out, the more it helps solve the problem. I have been in situations where you have and this isn't just neighborhood associations or HOAs, it's also been nonprofits where board members or the board is not transparent how they're doing things. And it gets people a little bit upset because they're being surprised, they're being caught off guard. There can be situations where board members are not giving out information to a problem they're working on. And once again, the association members are a little bit upset about that. Good example is when I worked for corporate America back in the late 80s, I was a food microbiologist. And the organization I worked for was a large corporation that manufactured food products that went out throughout the world. And we caught wind that the company, that the food factory we had here may be shutting down. And each time I asked my vice president about it, he said, no, that's all rumors. Although we were feeling it and sensing it, they weren't providing a lot of information. There were about 500 production line employees. I was the director of quality control of the food microbiologist, so senior management. And then about 2 weeks before the organization shut down, he decided to tell everybody that they were shutting everything down and they weren't gonna, that was it. And I felt bad for a lot of the employees that were there because it didn't give them a lot of time to look for a new job. So you could imagine in the 2 weeks, the conflict that the confrontations that came out of that, the massive amount of conflict between employees and management and other employees. It was a tough 2 weeks, but I really thought that there should have been more transparency and honesty there to at least help employees deal with it emotionally, mentally, and look for other jobs. Achieving clarity on my needs and other parties' needs will help. Sometimes in a conflict situation, things are so cloudy and foggy and vague that nobody really knows what's going on. So it leaves them in the dark. And for many of us, we don't like to be in the dark. We like to know. I know in talking to some colleagues of mine, that was one thing this pandemic did to them. Sometimes they felt they really didn't know a lot about the variants, a lot about what was safe, what was not. They just wanted a little bit more clarity. So that created some internal conflict with them, as well as conflict with some of between each other and different viewpoints. And this is important. Rather than smoothing out differences, draw them out, listen to them and problem solve about them. Once again, don't let a situation occur where I always equate it to, don't let that small fire in the field get bigger. If you see it and you see it burning, put it out, take care of it. Because if you retreat and you ignore it, it's going to get bigger and it's going to burn the entire field down. So I'm a big advocate of any type of situation that creates conflict should be addressed at the earliest moment possible. Now, keep in mind, I will say this also, is there 100% resolution to conflict situations? No, I'm a realist. I think a lot of you know that too. It does take two parties, it does take two individuals to want to participate in resolving a problem. And I recognize there will be times when one party, one individual does not want to play fair, does not want to participate. I get that. I understand that. And that's okay. But if you as an individual have used all your resources to try, all your skill to try and resolve the conflict, and it still doesn't resolve it, at least you can walk away from that saying, I did the best I could to resolve this. And that's what counts. So I just want to make that clear that what I'm showing you here and some of the skills I'm going to show you here, they're great. And in the majority of cases, even as a dean of students and dealing with a huge number of cases I dealt with, and some of mine were serious threats, assaults. There was always a resolution to the conflict. Rarely, maybe 1% of the time, there wasn't. So I always bring that up. Let's look at some reasons for conflict. Limited resources. Some of you have been in situations where you have groups or individuals that are competing for the same resources. Sometimes you'll see this in organizations. Every organization, we were always competing for more budget against another department, more staffing. It happened even in, you could have it occur within neighborhood associations. You could have neighborhood associations competing for a grant. And that's the same resource. You might have 5 HOAs, NAs competing for grant funds against each other. One of the greatest things I did see many years ago was about 3 or 4 neighborhood associations who got together to collaborate to write a grant instead of competing against each other, which I thought that's one of the nicest things. Communication problems. Each person or group focuses on their wants and needs and fails to listen or communicate effectively. I think that's the one that occurs when emotionally we get rooted in our wants and needs, and we don't want to listen to your wants and needs. It's all about me. It's not about you. And I make that clear. That's right. I think that usually happens. There is no communication going on there. I used to see it often in a lot of the different jobs I was involved in. I used to see it often in some of the national boards that I served on, where people from different parts of the country focused on their own needs and did not want to listen to the needs in another part of the country. Different perceptions and attitudes. Another reason, it could be due to backgrounds, norms, and experiences of parties involved. That's important to recognize when you're dealing with conflict is who is the other person I'm talking to? What are their backgrounds? What experiences do they bring to the table that I should be sympathetic and empathetic to and understand, and vice versa? I'm hoping that happens as well. When you look at the lack of clarity, I mentioned that earlier, it's often associated with project work. There were numerous times that I would be involved my department would be involved in a project, and another department would be involved in the same project, but I wasn't getting clear information from them so that we could work together to achieve the common goal. And sometimes what happens in organizations is people create silos. They don't want to share information. They don't want clarity. And so you're battling that. Heck, I've seen people create silos even in HOAs and NAs. This is my territory, and this is I'm not going to give out information. I'm not going to share it. And I think it's so important to share information, especially for the purpose of the better everybody involved is in resolving a project, the better they are in understanding information and other such items that allows them to solve the project, the better off everybody's going to be. And then another reason, if you look at it, is just different interests or goals. Often one side of the conflict is feeling the interests and goals are being ignored. This is one where sometimes I've seen more in HOAs and NAs, where you might have the majority of association members are focused on, I'm just going to give some general examples here. You might have an association where the majority of association members are wanting to focus on crime and speeding through the neighborhood, but then you have the board that wants to focus on picking up dog poop in the parks in their neighborhood association. So you have those different interests and goals that creates that reason for conflict. I see that happen often with HOAs and NAs, is sometimes a disconnect between what the majority of associate members want and what the board is looking at when it comes to goals or interest. Okay. Here's something that research has shown. When conflict's unresolved, all these different emotions and things happen. Animosity rears its ugly head. You start to maybe be angry at people within your own neighborhood, within your own organization. You start to get frustrated. And when people are frustrated, I think sometimes they shut down and they don't want to participate or be involved anymore, which is not a good thing. I'm a big believer in having people be involved and be a part of something good. Lack of motivation, I see that often when conflict's not resolved. It's just people don't want to be a part. They don't want to participate. They don't want to do it anymore. Failure, lawsuits. In some of the organizations I worked at, even at the college, I was involved in a few lawsuits at the federal level and local level, where one party felt that in the resolution of the conflict that it wasn't resolved. So I've been through that. In some cases, violence, both verbal, physical. I have seen both of those situations occur. Rarely, but I have seen it. So those are things to really be and I'll share one that to me was very important in handling the conflict where there could have been potential violence. 6 months into being dean of students, I had a situation where a student, and when I say students, I want everybody to recognize that I'm not talking just college age students. I'm talking students that were between the ages of 15 and 90. I had a adult male student who threatened to murder me in a situation because we were dealing with discipline. He threatened violence. In that process of interacting with him, yes, I was a little stressed, I was a little nervous, but I wanted to resolve the conflict there. I wanted to see what was causing the behavior. And in that process, we had several conversations where we were trying to resolve things, even to a point where I told him, look, there is going to be some type of disciplinary action here. I understand that, but I'd like to see if we can change the behavior. And I gave him some options for him to get some help and assistance. He did not want to do that. To make a long story short, he was expelled by a committee. But about 6 months later, I saw him back on campus, and he came up to me, which was surprising. I was a little nervous, and he shook my hand and he said, "Thank you for listening to me and for trying to help me. I appreciate that. I know what I did was wrong, and I know you were probably scared. And I created conflict not just with you, but with many other people." And he walked away. I'm not saying every situation that could involve violence would turn out that way, but it was one situation that I at least was able to walk away from and say, "Wow, okay." So that was a good learning situation for me to maybe try and do that in the future. I'm not saying that's what you all would do. I was able to do that based on the situation I was in. The other, when you look at conflict, is low productivity at work. Research has shown that at work, when conflict's not resolved, you're going to end up, your motivation is going to go down, your productivity is going to decrease, people are going to miss work because they're not feeling good. Anxiety, depression is going to creep in, and lack of progress. Another example of this is years ago, back in the early 80s, I was a phlebotomist at Presbyterian Hospital. This would have been mid 80s, I should say, instead of early 80s. I had a shift that was from 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. And from 4 to 7, I worked the shift alone. So I was responsible for drawing blood and on all the floors. And it was very tough for me because there were times when I felt I could have used another blood drawer. And long story short, I was not able to get another blood drawer to help me. And so I started to miss work. My anxiety creeped up. And then I realized that the best thing for me, the most healthy thing for me would be to quit and maybe step away from that. So it's just a situation that I was involved in that I recognized that I'm not going to resolve this conflict with the other party. So for me, the best way to resolve it would be to walk away. And I did for my own health. Let's look at some types of conflict. I'm going to give you 4 types here. There's personal conflict, which many of you have been involved in. That's really conflict that's directed at and between individuals, between 2 parties, between 2 people. I'd venture to say that all of you on this presentation have been involved in personal conflict. Some of you have resolved it very well, and others of you may not have. It's all based, once again, on what we're feeling comfortable with when it comes to resolving a conflict. And hopefully some of the skills I'll talk about here shortly will help you do that. There's subject or issue conflict, and that's conflict that's related to the group's works and goals. I gave you the example of an association where you might have the association members, I was telling you, their focus, they want to focus on speeding and crime in the neighborhood, but the board's focused on dog situations in the park. So there's that type of conflict. There's procedural conflict that emerges from work methods and strategies. The biggest procedural type of conflict I've seen at least in neighborhood associations and HOAs and nonprofits is bylaws. Failure for board members to follow the bylaws effectively, or lack of bylaws. I'm often surprised when I talk to certain groups that should have bylaws that they don't have them. And I've always thought that bylaws are so important to have because that's the foundation that governs how you operate, at least as a board. And the other thing I find surprising is that when I've spoken to some groups and they do have bylaws, I'll ask them, do you look at them on a regular basis? I just worked with a group that hadn't changed their bylaws in 15 years. That's a long time. So that's usually when the procedural conflict pops up. Competitive conflict, that's going to occur when you have groups or individuals that are competing for the same financial or human resources. Most of the time, this is happening in the workplace, where you have departments that are competing for the extra budget, extra help, extra staffing. You have, let me go back there and just say one more thing about it's not just financial or human resources. It could be any type of resource that you're competing for. But like I said, this happens mostly in the workplace. Now, let's look at how we as human beings react to conflict, our responses. Now, mind you, during any phase of dealing with conflict, we may go through 4 of these responses or all of them. Some of them can be detrimental to our health if it is the way we deal with it 100% versus maybe, and you'll hear me use an example of it later, but when it comes to conflict response, one of the biggest ones I see is we just avoid it. Okay, we ignore it, it'll go away. Hopefully with time, people forget, and that's not necessarily the case. Time will not take care of the conflict. Whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's a association, or it's at work, or it's 2 parties, it does not. I always like to say that conflicts don't evaporate. They don't just disappear. Many times they'll linger. If anything, what it causes is more anger and animosity to build up. Okay, pushing conflicts below the surface and pretending that they don't exist creates tension and holds groups and individuals back. That's just straight out there. We can't pretend they don't exist. We need to address them, and we need to feel comfortable addressing them. Okay, problems and disagreements that are intense enough to be called conflict have little chance of resolving themselves without a positive effort. If anything that I hope we do today is that you can walk away from this and say, okay, I've learned some skills and I will make a positive effort to diffuse a situation or resolve the conflict. Even if it doesn't get resolved and I've used all my resources and I've done everything possible to do it, at least you can walk away and say, hey, I made a positive effort. I did what I could to make this happen. If there's anything we walk away is at least having that type of attitude and outlook on it. Okay. Avoiding might take the form of diplomatically sidestepping an issue, postponing an issue until a better time, simply withdrawing from the threatening situation. Majority of the time, I just see people they withdraw, they back off. And I get it. It can be hard. It can be fearful. I get it. It's much harder to solve something together than it is sometimes to retreat. I get it. Now, I will say this, sometimes in a conflict situation, avoidance is not bad. If you're in a meeting and somebody is yelling and screaming at you and you're trying to calm them down and trying to calm the situation down, say, hey, look, if there's any way, Rudy, that we can talk about this after this meeting so we can listen to each other clearly and without emotion, let's do that. Let's schedule it for tomorrow. That avoidance is okay because you're not completely disengaging, right? You're just doing it for the moment so that you can back up a little bit and get a clear mind. You both can get a clear mind and you can both address it. There's surrendering, okay? People who cannot tolerate dissension and conflict often just give up and let the dominant people or groups have their way. I've seen this often also. I've seen it in the place of work where you have a really dominant personality or department and they just are pushy and aggressive. And after a while, people say, I give up. I don't want to fight this and let them have it. I've seen it in association meetings where you have a dominant person or groups. And because it's not being controlled and it's not being addressed, they continue with the behavior and the action. And I'm a big believer in that when we allow a behavior or an action to continue, then it's going to continue. Until we address it and discuss it, then you don't. Until then, you see change. You won't see change until you do that. Okay. It eases conflict for the moment when you're surrendering, but it may not be the best thing for the organization or individual. And take a look at that last bullet. It takes the form of selfless generosity or clarity, obeying another person's order when you prefer not to, yielding to another person's point of view. When I see surrendering happen, I oftentimes, the person who has surrendered, sometimes I see the angst in their heart. I see the anger on their face because they did something they didn't want to do. And I'm a big believer in don't do something you don't want to do. There's nothing wrong with expressing your feelings or your thoughts on something. There's nothing wrong with that. The more often you do that and the more often you express your point of view, the better you're going to be at feeling better about yourself and better about what you just did, because that needs to happen. We all need to see each other's viewpoints in a respectful and civil way to help us resolve any type of situation we're in. Now, when you look at the right, I wrote on there, the ability to sort through issues in an impersonal, non-threatening way helps the understanding and eventual resolution of the issue and allows groups to move forward. I wrote that because we can do this, okay? As long as we do it, we sort through these issues and we do it in a non-threatening way and not letting their emotion dictate how we do it. Resolution to conflict is possible. We just have to work at it and know that we can do it and have a strong faith in ourselves or in the group or in the party that we with to try and accomplish it. It's just so many of us have been taught to sometimes retreat and surrender and give up because we don't want to deal with it. When I'm trying to get people to reframe your mind in a positive way, say, hey, we can make this work. I know we agree or disagree, but let's see if we can agree and move forward on something. This is the one that I have seen and I don't like. Verbal attacks. People want to fight it out verbally. They want to pursue their own concerns at the others. They'll use any tactic to coerce others into conforming to their views and use insults or superior force to defeat the opposition. I worked with a colleague who, he didn't use verbal attacks, he used email. He would use email and attack you email-wise. He wouldn't want to do it in front of you, but he would do it behind a monitor. And I used to tell my colleagues, whatever you do, be careful with this person, because once he shoots an email and you're in a dialogue and he doesn't like what you're saying, he's going to go into some strong email attacks on you, and you're going to get defensive, and then you're going to have an email war going on. So it was one of those things where you had to adapt to that behavior. And I was always amazed that his VP never called him on it, because I thought it was really harming dialogues with some of the other folks that we were working with. The other thing is that, once again, as dean of students, I would find that students in online courses were more apt to attack you via words in the monitor than they were via verbal attack, because being in front of you and seeing you, you would see the hurt and pain in another person's face, which sometimes would affect you. Whereas behind a monitor, you don't see that. But verbal attacks are tough. They are one of those things that I've seen them happen in meetings where somebody stands up and starts yelling and screaming. And what happens is the defenses go up, the emotions pop up, and fight or flight. Some of us fight back, some of us just don't do anything. When the easiest thing you could do is please, look, we have to follow our agenda. We have ground rules. Please, maybe you and I can talk about this after the meeting. And I, listen to what your concerns are and move forward with that. Now, sometimes I have been in meetings where even ground rules and civility in trying to keep somebody who's verbally yelling and screaming, it doesn't stop. And the meeting has to be stopped, and it ends because that person has stopped. Now, I have seen meetings where security is called to try and pull somebody out because they just are not stopping with the verbal attacks. Okay. Here's another response. Negotiation. These next two are my two favorites. Okay. Process by which different parties to the conflict offer their views of the dispute, describe their positions, and ultimately put their suggestions on the table for resolution. It's really what it is compromise, and give and take for both parties can result in an acceptable outcome if there's compromise on both sides and a willingness to look for creative solutions. Clarifying interests without locking into a particular position, listening to the needs of the other side to help in the negotiation. Compromise is different than collaboration. I'll talk about collaboration here shortly. I mean, with negotiation / compromise, really you're kind of setting aside some of the things that you want for the greater good of the movement forward. Okay. It can result in good outcomes. The last two I'll be talking about here, negotiation and collaboration, does take a little bit more effort, does take a little bit more patience, and does take a little bit more time. But man, if you can put, by golly, if you can put the energy behind it, the successes you're going to have are just going to be phenomenal. They really are. But it takes some energy. Okay. Conflict response, collaborating. Okay, this is where you're trying to create that win-win situation where everybody's looking at the greater good and they're agreeing to things as a group so that you can come out of this conflict with a good resolution. Find a solution that fully satisfies the concerns of both. Collaboration takes a little bit more energy than compromise or negotiation. Okay, it does require listening to the wants, needs, fears, and concerns of all sides. There's that listening thing again. It's one thing that I think many of us don't do well. We don't listen well. We like to talk, but we don't listen well. Sometimes I don't listen well. Even though I teach active listening, sometimes my brain's working 100 miles faster when somebody else is talking. And I'm like, okay, let's get to the point here. And I have to teach myself, no, I need to listen. Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has something to say. Let me listen. You can make all parties involved in a conflict feel valued and heard. Once again, one of the most common things I hear is, I was not heard. Excuse me. It is so nice when somebody walks out of a conflict and says, I was heard. I felt valued. I felt that they listened to me. I really did. That's so important. And it's such an easy thing to do. It's such an easy thing to do, but sometimes we don't do it. Finding a solution that serves everyone. Okay, here's what I said earlier. It's considered a win-win situation because both parties come satisfied with a solution or outcome. So I love the last two. I love negotiation, collaborating. It is an art. It takes some skill, but gosh, when you can do it, it is such a wonderful outcome. Such a wonderful outcome. Let's look now. Let's look at some of these methods and skills here. Addressing conflict. Most of these are very doable. Most of you have done them. So I may not be showing you anything new. If anything, I may just be reinforcing what you're already doing. Have a conversation with the other person or group. Boy, that's easy. That can be hard to do. If there's been some angst there and there's been some anger, it can be hard to do, but it is doable. Having a dialogue with people, I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy listening to people. When I dealt with heavy issues of conflict at work, and I'll say it again, I always felt that people would come together in a better way and fashion if there was food at the table. You're sharing a meal. There's less angst and anger and less hate there by being able to sit across the table from somebody and enjoy a nice dish of whatever, and have a good meal out of that. We were working with a elementary or a middle school here recently where the staff was having issues, and so we were supporting them, and we bought them a lunch. And the principal told me, Rudy, that lunch did more for the staff to get together and address their conflict than it did anything else. They were able to sit down and enjoy the enchiladas that you bought for us and the drinks, and over an hour and a half iron out solutions to some problems. Okay, focus on the behavior and events, not the personalities. Don't focus on the person. Focus on the behavior and the events. I emphasize that behavior and events. So many times I'll hear somebody say that Rudy is a blank, blank, blank. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be the behavior. Should be that behavior is something that we need to look at and see if we can change and address it. Here's the active listening bullet here, making that conscious effort to hear and understand and retain information that's being relayed to you. Very, very important with the active listening. I don't think we are good active listeners. I think with everything that we have in front of us, technology-wise, we're just not active. Well, look at Zoom. When it comes to Zoom, all my workshops have been in person because I like seeing faces. I like listening. I like talking to the attendees. When it comes to Zoom, sometimes I'm facing a screen, but I get it. You know, as an adaptation that the pandemic caused a lot of conflict in the workplace, caused a lot of conflict in the world, how we do things, and we shifted. Now, there's a good example of the pandemic. For many of us, we shifted, we dealt with the conflict by readdressing our behaviors and doing what we need to do. But active listening is one of those things where you really benefit from if you do it well and you do it on a regular basis. Okay. So identify what you agree and disagree about. That's okay. It's okay to disagree if it's done civilly and respectfully. Okay. Here's one that I like. Clarify the issue for yourself in writing. Think on paper. I used to tell folks, if you're angry about something, and I think you've heard this, if you're angry with somebody, write a letter, stick it in your drawer, write an email, put it in draft form. Don't send it until you've had time to think about it. I've often thought that when you're in a situation involving conflict and you're able to step back a little bit, sit down and type out, write out, clarify what the issue is so you can go back and address it instead of being lost in the fog of what the conflict's about. Address your emotions. Write down what you think the solutions could possibly be. But thinking on paper is a nice way to think versus doing it in such a way where it may not end well, okay? So important to do that. Develop the plan to resolve the conflict. What outcomes do you want to see? One thing that I love doing when I was at CNM as Dean of Students is sometimes I would develop the school would use something called success plans, or I would develop a behavior plan where it was a plan for that person who was involved in a situation to move forward. And I always liked that because it laid out a nice journey, a nice pathway for somebody to follow. It's important whenever you're in conflict to know, what is it that I want out of this? What is it that the other person wants out of it, so that we can either compromise or collaborate on this and see if we can move forward. Follow through with your plan. That's important. It's something that I think sometimes we don't do, but it's important. And then build on your success. One thing I always did when I felt I was successful with any type of conflict resolution, I would always go back and look at my notes and see, what did I do well and what didn't I do well, so that I could build upon it for the next situation I might be involved in. If I had success in dealing with a conflict situation where both of us walked away and shook hands, I want to be able to know, okay, what did I do well there, so that next time I could maybe do the same thing, so that I can get better at this. It's really about building your skills. Okay. Addressing the conflict, create a safe and quiet space for dialogue. I will see people engaged in an intense dialogue, conflict of some type, whether in meetings, in spaces where other people are seeing it happen. The thing I always dislike is being in whether it's a neighborhood association or HOA meeting or a nonprofit meeting, where you have that going on in an open arena where people are seeing it, nobody's putting a stop to it. It is so easy to just say, please, look, we have the ground rules on our ground rule state. Each person should have 3 minutes to speak. It states be civil and be respectful. I am willing to listen to you, but right now I'm just going to ask if you could sit down and let us finish this meeting. Let us move forward, and afterwards we could have a dialogue on this. Maybe go have a cup of coffee, maybe go to the park. I say office if you're in a workplace, maybe a neutral office. Once again, that level of power and authority could be a little off-putting for somebody if you're going into your supervisor's office. This is easier said than done. Be relaxed. I know that's hard in a conflict situation. One of the things that I know all of you have heard this is good breathing techniques. It really works, but few of us practice it. as Dean of Students, I oversaw the Veterans Resource Center. And at one point, I was talking to a SEAL, a Navy SEAL, and he was telling me the techniques that they use to control their breathing. And I started to practice it. And I thought, wow, this works. It really works. It was something that I also had learned early in my career. I was a emergency medical technician here in Albuquerque in the early 80s. And I had a phenomenal partner. I was 18 at the time, 19. She was 40, and she had been doing this for almost 20 years. And she also taught me about breathing techniques in situations like that. It's just a matter of putting yourself in a very relaxed mode so that you can be comfortable and be willing to support the other person in this dialogue of addressing conflict to move towards resolution. And at that last point, look for common ground. That's a nice way to try and connect with somebody. I always say you don't want to hold your ground when it comes to conflict. You want to be able to look for that common ground, move across, to be able to shake hands and say, hey, we accomplished something. I think we came to resolution here. Okay. Now, what do you want to do? Well, understand that conflicts are inevitable. Yeah, we know that. You're going to deal with conflict every day in life. You could have that driver that cuts you off. You could have the driver that takes your parking space. They are inevitable. Resolve to address conflict quickly if possible and appropriately. Do focus on the problem. Keep an open mind and be open to new solutions. Acknowledge how other people are feeling during the process. Practice that active listening. Give your conversations room to breathe. When I say room to breathe, that doesn't mean you're just going at it and at it and at it and at it. It's okay to have some silence. In a lot of my meetings with angry individuals, it was okay when there was silence. I was fine with that. Eventually, somebody who's angry and upset, if you're hearing them out, they're not going to keep going at it. They eventually slow down a bit to where sometimes they wear themselves out because you've just been listening to them. There's that common ground again. A lot of us don't realize we have resources we can use to mediate conflicts. Maybe you've tried everything within your own power. You've tried to focus on the problem. You've kept the open mind. You've acknowledged other people's feelings. You are actively listening. You've tried to come up with resolution. It still doesn't happen. One of my last slides, I'm going to talk about Vanessa from ONC is a good resource. There's the Alternative Dispute Resolution Office, City of Albuquerque. You might know licensed mediators or facilitators. I have facilitated different levels of conflict before from people that have known me. So just things to think about. Encourage that open communication. But last, when you look at that bullet there, treat all persons with respect and dignity. I think that's important. No matter what your bias or stereotype may be, treat everybody with respect and dignity. So important. And you heard me earlier say I dealt with that student that threatened me. I still treated him with respect and dignity because I was trying to change a behavior to create success for him. He chose another path, but later on, he did shake my hand. Here's the do nots. Do not focus on personality traits that cannot be changed. It's important. Okay. Don't interrupt others when they are speaking. So many times I see that happen in a verbal exchange. Do not attack individuals. Do not attack them. Okay. Do not make it a competition. Many of us are competitive by nature. I think our society really pushes competitiveness, and it's not a competition. It isn't. It's about two parties, two people trying to come together to dialogue and see if they can walk away shaking hands with a win-win situation, or at least a compromise. Okay. Do not disregard the feelings of others. I have seen that often. They're not, here's what I'm feeling, and somebody says, yeah, you're not feeling that, or yeah, here's my feelings. Don't disregard other people's feelings, especially fear. Do not disregard fear. One person's fear may be another person's level of comfort. Don't disregard fear. When it comes to conflict, Oftentimes it involves fear and anxiety. Don't disregard those. Okay? Don't avoid the conflict. Let's address it. Okay? Don't allow your emotions to take over the conversation. Here's the emotions again. Okay? Work on that. Try and allow your emotions to remain calm so that logic can move you forward. Do not impose your own personal values or beliefs on the situation, because you do that, that's going to take everything south really fast. Okay, it's that simple. It's a matter of active listening and doing all you can to ensure that the other person is going to do the same for you so you can move forward. Okay. Do not always try to fix yourself instead of evaluating the best method of resolution. Okay, so just some do's and do nots. As we start to wrap this up, let's look at some resources. You heard me mention the alternative dispute resolution. I'm sure Vanessa can speak more to that. She comes back on here in a little bit. Her Office of Neighborhood Coordination. Professional mediators or facilitators. Some of you may even be a professional mediator or a facilitator. And just so you know the difference, mediation, usually a mediator is brought in when there is severe conflict, and the two parties already know what the problem is, and the mediation is done to get them to move forward from the issue. Whereas a facilitator comes in typically with a larger group of people to work with them jointly to move in a direction with a positive decision. Okay. You could have, if you're on an HOA, you could have other board members you could use as resources. They might have experience with conflict and say, how do I deal with it? In some cases, it's the board as a party dealing with conflict with another party. You might have colleagues that are experienced in this. Other neighborhood associations, they are a wealth of resource. There are a lot of you all out there doing really good work in your neighborhood. I mean, awesome work, to where you can call each other up and say, hey, Rudy, what are you doing over there? Or I could call somebody up and say, hey, what's going on with yours? Have you ever dealt with this? How did you handle it? So use each other as resources if you've got good experience behind it and you have had good results. Okay. So in summary, let's look at this. When it comes to conflict, staying calm, I know, easier said than done. It's hard. It's hard. It takes practice. It takes practice. Listen to understand. Don't listen just to listen to understand. Look for the positive. And this is interesting. Did you know that about 70% of our internal dialogue is negative by nature? It's not positive. And I always try to teach people to turn that internal negative dialogue into a positive dialogue, because you'll see better outcomes. But look for the positive. Learn to communicate effectively. Okay? It's not, you don't even have to do research on how to communicate effectively. It's just a matter of presenting your ideas and presenting your feelings in a very pure, basic way so that other people are hearing it, and vice versa. Okay? Focusing on the problem, not the person. It's hard sometimes. But when you look at the problem, it makes it a little bit easier to see a potential outcome. Avoid finger pointing or blaming. I see that a lot. Oh, if it wasn't for Rudy, we wouldn't be doing that, or Rudy did this. It takes you nowhere. It might make you feel better in the interim, but it doesn't go anywhere. Okay. Focus on moving forward. Okay. Focus on asking the right questions. Now, here's the one, and you've heard this: choose your battles. Okay. And dealing with conflict, sometimes you might have to do that. Sometimes you might have to, hey, I have taken this as far as I can, and it's not going to go any further. Maybe it's time for me to move on. It's not going to happen. I got to pick my battles wisely. Sometimes I see this in NAs and HOAs where a member of the board is choosing a battle, thinking that the rest of the board is behind them, and they're not, because there's disconnection there. And I've seen that happen. Or the board is choosing a battle with a certain entity and the association members aren't. Okay. Give choices. One of the things I did, once again, as a dean of students, is I gave students options and choices when it came to resolving conflict. Be as creative as you can. Here's an important one. Feel good about yourself so you can be confident. It's hard to be confident when you're dealing with a situation where you might think, maybe I'm not doing this right. Maybe I'm not be confident. And what I should have put in there, surround yourself with confident, positive people so that they can help you through this process. Now, here's one that I threw in there because I don't think we do very well. When I teach leadership, I also teach celebrate the agreement. Once you've agreed on something, give yourself a pat on the back and celebrate. Feel good about it. Say, wow, we did something, we accomplished something. We don't celebrate enough in life, and I'm not sure why. When you complete a goal, you complete a project, celebrate. When you make it through conflict and you resolve something, celebrate. Tell the other person, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee. Let's go have you want a glass of water? We did something here. So let's talk about, this is one of my last slides. I believe Vanessa sent these out, conflict checklist and ground rules. And what I tried to do for you is, there was a checklist that I put together that basically, if you answered yes to all of those items on the checklist for managing conflict, you're moving in a good direction in handling it. It's a basic checklist, but I wanted to just put something together that you could look at that and ask yourself those questions. And if you're answering yes, then you're moving forward. If you're answering no, maybe go back and say, okay, I answered no. Let me see why I answered no. I put together ground rules. And the only reason I did ground rules is that I know people will sometimes say, that's archaic, they're not helpful. I have always used ground rules in all the meetings I've ever done, in all the boards I've been on, and they are only as good as the enforcement behind them. And I have rarely ever seen anybody violate ground rules. Actually, if anything, I think people like having a set of ground rules. Even in Zoom meetings, you could have some ground rules. Vanessa set some ground rules earlier, and I supported them, added a few more. But they're important. And when it comes to dealing with conflict, if you're in meeting situations, ground rules can be so beneficial. I now want to open it up to questions. I know Vanessa will be looking at that before we wrap it up. Thank you for those of you who listened in on Zoom. I did not get a chance to see your faces, but I do appreciate your time. Questions?
Thanks, Rudy, so much. There's a gentleman, or somebody who has a question rather. I'll let him in shortly.
Sure.
I did first off want to say again, thank you very much for sharing very, very valuable, useful information. I particularly like the fact that it's not just techniques that can be used in neighborhood association meetings or HOA meetings or group meetings, but these are techniques that I think all of us can use in our day-to-day interactions with our family, with people in our lives, with our friends, with our colleagues, coworkers. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. It was really useful. For me at least, I took from it that a lot of the techniques you offer people have to do with maybe not taking things on a personal level. And I know that I think all of us do when we really care about something, just as our neighborhood association folks do. They invest themselves very strongly. And I sometimes think even particularly more so because neighborhood associations are done with volunteers. And so it's very natural to invest yourself emotionally in something you've put so much work in, and it can be a challenge to try and remove yourself from that. So I very much appreciate the techniques that you offered us today. There's just wonderful presentation. I know a lot of people have asked if they'd be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, so I'm hoping you can send that to me.
Sure.
And for our attendees, some of you had sent me your email. If there are others who would like a copy, please type your email in the chat or email me. I will type my email address into the chat if you don't already have it. And you can just send me your request and I will get it for you as soon as Dr. Garcia gets it to me. So Jody actually has a question, Jody Roman. I'm going to let Jody into the chat, or the discussion with us rather. So if you could just give me a minute. I've only done this once, so hang on one second. There we go. Jody, you should be a panelist with us now. If you're not, let me know. There he is. Okay.
Yeah, I see him popping up there.
Hi, Jody. You want to unmute yourself? You can ask Dr. Garcia your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, hi, Jody.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for hosting this. I think this was a fantastic session today. And Dr. Garcia, thank you so much. This was
Sure.
great information. So my question is this. How do you recommend, or what kind of advice would you have for me on dealing with a party that is dishonest in nature and a lot of lying is going on and it's causing an issue within a community? What would you give me some basic ideas on how to cope with that?
Hi, Jody, and thank you for being on today and for asking the question. It goes back to trying to have that sit-down conversation with the other party to address the concern that you have. And I don't know the background enough if it's a situation with a neighbor or board and attendees. I dealt with a lot of situations at C&M where the party that was sent to me would be lying about something they did. And many times I would sit down and say, look, I want to address something with you that is of concern to me. And it's a situation of misrepresentation of information. And it's hard for me to dialogue in situations like that when I feel that the information is not correct. What can we do to make this better? And what can we do to move forward with it? I've always recommended, regardless of what the other party is doing, is having that initial conversation with them and talking to them directly to address the concern is the first step. And like I said, not knowing the dynamics behind that, if that step doesn't work, then you just, I use the term escalate, you just escalate it to the next level. If it's a situation with another board member, then maybe you have other board members do the same. If it's a neighbor or a friend, in some situations, some people are not going to hear what you're saying and they're going to continue with the behavior. And then at that point, it's a matter of how do you cope with that behavior if it's a relationship. So I'm not sure, Jody, if it's is it a peer-to-peer type situation or is it in
It's a board member to a management company.
Okay. Then at that point, if I were the management company and the board member was misrepresenting information, I would address that in a conversation and have facts to be able to say, here's my concern, here's what's occurring, and let me give you some examples of where I feel, and then give that board member an opportunity to provide their input and their intake and tell me if what I have presented was incorrect and provide some factual information to maybe prove me otherwise, but explain why I'm concerned about it and how it's affecting operations or how it's affecting the relationship.
That's great. Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate your time today.
Sure. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Jody. We appreciate it. We got another question from another attendee. The question is, hold on, I just had it. I'm sorry, moderating is hard.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Hold on just a second. I just had it.
And Vanessa, can I say one more thing to Jody?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
Jody, one thing I should have also mentioned is that when you're dealing with an organization and a board member, when I say you may have to escalate it, that's why you want good bylaws that may state if a board member is not adhering to the character of what a board member should adhere to or is violating this policy and procedure, it gives that organization an option to address it in a very formal and clear way to a point where maybe that board member has to be removed. That's an action that sometimes is not taken, but that's where bylaws and other board guidelines come into play.
Absolutely. And that's right. Just to fall back on that as your guideline. Thank you so much again.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jody. I second what Dr. Garcia said. I think most of you who have been on these presentations previously have heard me talk about this. We highly, highly, highly recommend that you update your bylaws as on a regular basis, if at all possible. My office is happy to review them to give suggestions, but just a reminder, your bylaws are your governing and guiding documents. And so as such, they should reflect the needs and desires and wants of your board and of your members, because neighborhood associations are volunteer based and they are they run themselves. They are self-guided organizations. You know, we can provide resources, but our office can't really enforce your bylaws. So that has to be something that you all do. And it, you know, if you have well-written bylaws that address a variety of questions and you have a mechanism in your bylaws to address some of these questions that have come up, that's only going to be beneficial to your organization. So I'll get down from my bylaws soapbox now. We did have a question from Susan Bennett. Susan wanted to know if the techniques that you were describing in the PowerPoint, Dr. Garcia, could these same guidelines be used when dealing with people who have mental illness?
And you know, that's a very good question. And I'm sorry, who asked it?
This was Susan Bennett, one of our.
Okay. Yeah, Susan, thank you so much for asking that. I taught mental health first aid at C&M, and I taught it to faculty, staff, students, and security. And when it comes to mental health issues, they are similar techniques, but one, you've got to understand at this point, if the person you are interacting with does have some form of mental health or mental illness, it's understanding that up front, because it may, for in that situation, may mean that it's going to be a little bit different than dealing with the person-to-person type situation. My experience in interacting with folks in a conflict situation who had mental health illness, it was a longer process for me, partly because in dialogue with the person, I wouldn't find out if there was a mental health issue until maybe a meeting or two later. And then sometimes for me, it became a situation where what kind of support could I provide to you for the mental health issue? Is that mental health issue, is that the cause of the conflict? And if it's the cause of conflict, then how can I work with you on it, or work as a, you know, bring in other people to make it better? It is a very different situation, but it is a situation that, once again, I think with sympathy, empathy, and open dialogue, and showing that you support the other person, and I never say that you understand, because unless you have mental health issues, you wouldn't understand. And that's something I tried to, in my teachings at the college and to everybody, is that there are many folks who have mental health issues or situations in our lives. And really, it's a matter of understanding what it is so that it makes it easier for a better relationship to take place. But I think some of these techniques could very well work in those kind of dialogues.
Great. Thank you for that. Thanks for the question, Susan. Any other questions from our attendees? This is going once, going twice.
You know, Vanessa, one last thing I do want to say, I'm going to bring up bylaws again.
Yeah.
Bylaws are like the guiding, it's like the bus that guides you to honesty, transparency, and success. You get on the bus, you ride it, it's going to take you safely to your journey from point A to point B. The thing I see with bylaws is that a lot of groups ignore them. They don't practice them. They don't have them. And Vanessa's office is a good office to learn how to you know, do your bylaws. But one thing I have seen in my consulting business is people have asked me numerous times about situations with bylaws. And then when I do my research and I ask them, it's like, oh no, we don't have them. I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to have bylaws. One thing I did after the fiasco at Channel 27 is I wrote, when I redid the bylaws, I actually had an attorney review them. And then I actually did training with any prospective new board member over the bylaws. And a lot of times I would ask them to just sign an agreement that I have read the bylaws and I will uphold the bylaws. And we, as a board, will make amendments to the bylaws, review them annually, and do what we need to do. It takes some energy and effort, but sometimes that doesn't happen.
Thank you for that, Dr. Garcia. I really appreciate it. Before we end the webinar today, I just want to remind people that, you know, all the techniques that Dr. Garcia gave are very useful, very valuable. They're things that all of us can do, but also acknowledge the fact that at some point, as I'm sure all of us have had happen, there comes a time when whoever you might be dealing with, just absolutely the situations come to a point where there's nothing else to be done. I just want to remind everybody that the city does offer free mediation services, excuse me, through the city's alternative dispute resolution office. I'd be more than happy to direct you to that resource if it's something that you need. And I think a lot of people don't realize it, but they don't just work with groups, they work with individuals. They do mediation in cases of conflict between individuals, neighbors who are having conflicts. They do mediation for child custody disputes, marital disputes, anything and everything that could be considered, some sort of a dispute. They will do a mediation for. So I've helped coordinate mediations with them between several neighborhood groups citywide. I've helped coordinate mediations with them between individuals. They offer a very useful service and it's free of charge. So it is a very good resource for all of you. If it's ever something that you need, please reach out to my office and I will be more than happy to help coordinate that for you. And I think that is it. Lots of thank yous in the chat. Dr. Garcia, I think everybody's very, very appreciative of the techniques that you shared with us today. The presentation was fantastic, much needed. I know this is a very difficult time for a lot of people, a lot of groups. I think we're transitioning out of the pandemic and we're still dealing with a lot of the things that happen there. And there's a lot of anxiety, I think, in our culture and our society, and that sometimes can tend to add to the conflicts that are going on. So what you have shared with us today was incredibly valuable. Thank you so very much for taking the time. And for our attendees,
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you for taking the time. Those of you who have sent me your email address, I will get you the PowerPoint presentation. Last chance to ask any questions, either in the chat or of Dr. Garcia before we log off. Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, this session, as all of them, is being recorded. I will upload it to the ONC's YouTube channel later today. I will send out a link to this in the Monday's weekly e-news, and I will get the PowerPoint presentation. I can't talk today, sorry. The presentation to everybody just as soon as I can. Thank you again, all of you, for your help.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.